Hi, this is the video lecture on culture. So as you can probably tell, I am not in my home office today. I'm actually at work, so there aren't moving boxes in the background, and neither of my cats should make an appearance. So as you all read about in the assigned textbook chapter, culture is comprised of various elements, both material and non-material in nature. Make sure that you pay close attention to these parts of the textbook chapter. I feel like they're pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to go over them in detail now, but if you need further clarification, please let me know. What I want to talk about instead are the functions of culture. Just like what we learned about in our topic of socialization, culture also serves many functions or many purposes in our society. So first, culture helps to solve problems. When you have a society or a large group of people within a particular territory that are interdependent of one another, there are certain problems or issues that must be resolved. Page 112 of your textbooks list all of those known problems, and in a lot of ways the various aspects of culture, the material and non-material items that you've learned about, you've read about, help to solve those problems. So that's one function of culture. Culture also helps us fit in. So many of you may have traveled. I know some of you are currently traveling. And so when you encounter a culture that's not of your own, sometimes you can feel uneasy because you don't know how to fit in. You don't know this other society's norms and values and beliefs. And because of that, you feel a little bit uneasy. This is what we refer to as a culture shock. So knowing that culture, knowing the norms and the beliefs and the values helps you fit in. It helps you make it makes you feel at ease. Now, at the same time that culture helps us fit in, it's also important to note that culture constrains our behaviors as well. So Anderson, a very well-known sociologist, once wrote that culture tells us what we ought to do, what we ought to think, who we ought to be, and what we ought to expect of others. So in a lot of ways, culture both enables certain behaviors and prohibits others. Culture can put us in a rut so that we engage in the same norms and beliefs and values without questioning them. We'll talk more about this in just a moment. So lastly, culture also works as dominant ideology in that it reproduces the power and advantages for dominant groups. So dominant ideology is a set of beliefs and practices that help to maintain powerful social, economic, and political interest. So the idea here is that the behaviors, ideas, and values of any given culture that are acceptable are also the ones that tend to support the status quo, or are also the ones that tend to reinforce the dominance of certain groups. So for example, dominant ideas in U.S. society include that babies should come after marriage, or that we should be straight, that we should go to college, that people with penises shouldn't wear dresses, and all of these ideas help to support the dominance of certain groups over others. Now I want to cover a few more concepts related to the topic of culture, ones that I didn't assign to you in a reading, so make sure that you understand what I'm trying to communicate now. The first is ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is a mindset where you view your own culture as superior and you view other cultures as inferior. Now, ethnocentrism results in two types of biases. So first, and I think this one is probably pretty obvious, it results in an outsider's bias that views other cultures as wrong or weird or bad or basically inferior to their own. And I can give you a personal example of when I reacted to something with an outsider's bias. I was reading a sociology blog on the social construction of food, and towards the beginning of this blog there were pictures, images of chickens in cages that were obviously being readied for consumption. Now, the chickens in the cages didn't look like they were especially having happy chicken lives. They were pretty crammed in these cages, and when I saw these images, of course I felt bad for the chickens, but I also eat them, and so there's kind of a limited amount of empathy that I experienced in that moment. But I kept scrolling down, and the next image that I saw was very similar to the first, except in this case the cage was full of little fluffy kitty cats being readied for consumption. And as you all know, I have 2 non-traditional children. I'm very fond of my cats, and so my first reaction to seeing this image was, how dare they prepare to eat these cats for a meal? And in that moment I stopped myself and I said, wait a minute here, you are certainly exercising an ethnocentric reaction, and you are viewing this image through an outsider's bias. Now, an outsider's bias that stems from ethnocentrism is problematic for a variety of reasons. So the consequences of ethnocentrism include discrimination, prejudice, even violence towards other groups. The way English settlers treated American Indians or Native Americans is a good example of this. American Indians were thought to be savages, which led to the near genocide of this group. Ethnocentrism also results in an insider's bias, which I think is less obvious. This is the tendency for people to view their own culture as right or as normal. And the thing about it is that if we accept our culture and the arrangements within it without questioning them, this is extremely unsociological. If you'll remember from one of the very first topics we did in Unit 1, skepticism is at the heart of what it means to exercise your sociological imagination. And so this insider's bias can inhibit that degree of skepticism. Basically, if you think that your culture is right and superior, then why would you question it? Why would you question the arrangements that are found within it? Our cultural beliefs, values, norms are normalized, and because all of these things seem normal to us, they go unexamined. Culture inoculates us from critically examining our own culture. Now, so here's the thing. Sociologists work to overcome an insider's bias and work to overcome an outsider's bias. And here's how they go about doing it. In order to overcome an outsider's bias, we try to practice what's referred to as cultural relativism. This is the idea that other people and their way of doing things can only be understood in their cultural context. So you essentially try to become an insider to that culture. And on the flip side of that, in order to overcome an outsider's bias, you want to take in order to overcome an insider's bias, you take an outsider's perspective. So this is the practice of examining one's own culture through the lens of an outsider. You try to make the familiar strange. So in a lot of ways, what I'm suggesting to you is that in order to overcome an outsider's bias, you need to become an insider. And in order to overcome an insider's bias, you need to become an outsider. Doing so can help us practice those ever so important critical thinking skills, as well as help to build our mental dexterity. And of course, all of this helps to promote understanding between cultures, as well as a deeper awareness of what's going on within our own. Okay, that's it for now. Have a great day.